Our final speaker has worked as a trainer, mediator, and communication specialist for over 17 years, and we are pleased to have Jenny Psaki with us today. As mediator, yeah, go ahead. As a mediator, Jenny has worked with multi-generational disputes for the family courts of New York and New Jersey. She has trained students and professionals at Hofstra, Fordham, NYU, and Columbia universities. Jenny has also trained mental health professionals in the area of social work advocacy. She has trained parent advocates whose children require appropriate educational accommodations and services. Jenny's been a social worker and advocate for Legal Services for Children of New York and the Self-Advocacy Association of New York. That's an organization of lobbyists and advocates who are themselves people with disabilities. She has worked with Catholic Charities in Brooklyn, the National Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, and the National Association for the Deaf, and for Safe Horizons of New York. Most recently, Jenny has been a principal trainer for Family Kind Incorporated, where she coaches for divorcing parents and families in transition. Jenny has spoken at the New York and New Jersey Bar Association's statewide conventions, as well as the Association for Family and Conciliation Courts National Convention in Washington, D.C. Jenny is currently the owner and principal mediator for Cranberry Family Mediation Services of New Jersey. And this is becoming a recurring theme. As if that weren't enough, she is a Girl Scout alumna. She was a Brownie Junior and Cadet Girl Scout. Please extend a big welcome to Jenny Psaki.
Wow, Professor, that's going to be a very tough act to follow. I was very impressed. Thank you. Ladies, I'm going to, and gentlemen, I'm going to ask a little bit about you before I begin, because I kind of want to make sure I bring up issues that seem as relevant to the people in the room as possible. So think back to when you were in school. How many of you as students had a fellow student in your class perhaps that may have had a disability or that you were aware of that had a disability? Okay, quite a few. All right. When I was coming up, I actually used to work for a program called the Kids Project, and I worked for them back in the early 90s, and back then inclusion was a brand new thing, and so we got hired to go into schools with puppets that had disabilities, and we gave presentations to students with the puppets that had the disabilities. There was one in a wheelchair, there was one who was deaf, who signed, etc. And to try to teach kids that inclusion was a good thing and that everybody was capable and yada, yada, yada. And we thought that that was gonna be enough, that was gonna get everybody ready. So it's very possible, given how many of you raised your hand just now, that I either did a puppet show for you or you saw one of my colleagues doing that. But I have a feeling when you think back on it, you think, that was a pretty naive idea of what inclusion should be. Some other questions about the group. How many of you have girls in your troupe who have a known disability? Wow, just about everybody. Good. Okay. And age-wise, how many of you have troops of girls who are either in elementary school or middle school? Okay, most of you. Anybody have girls who are high school students? Okay, the minority. The reason I am asking is because some of the information really does change from age group to age group. When I was asked to give this presentation, I was asked to talk about inclusion, but not necessarily physical access inclusion. I was also asked to talk about, well, what do you do when there's different behavioral needs of the kids who are in your troupe and you're working with them? And what do you do if you have a particular girl who might be ostracized by the other girls, not necessarily being accepted effectively? And then what can you do to have activities that are inclusive for all of your girls that still follows the Girl Scouting principles, etc.? That's what we'd like you to speak about. Like, holy cow, in 45 minutes. So here's what I did. I did a little bit of research. on where inclusive education is now. As I said, back in the 80s and 90s, the whole idea was, oh, you just get some cute puppets and that'll be enough to teach kids about inclusion. You know what? I can't think of anything more insulting. I have to say that I was an American Sign Language interpreter for 11 years. I still work quite a bit with members of the deaf community. And when I tell them that I did the hands behind a deaf puppet, I get a look of, how dare you? Really? How dare you? What about a conversation about culture? What about a conversation about strengths and power and individuality? What about conversations about people with disabilities as people? We weren't doing that back then. If we really want to build a strong platform for healthy development and effective learning, we must pay as much attention to children's emotional well-being and social capabilities as we do to their academic capabilities. The funny thing is, if you look, and that's by the National Scientific Council of the Developing Child, they are looking at the needs of kids with disabilities, different abilities, whether they be abilities that relate to cognitive issues, whether they're issues related to behavioral issues, spectrum issues, physical challenges, etc. Ironically, what that means is that in our school system, whether we are in the elementary schools or in the high schools, in our school system, we should be spending as much time dealing with capabilities as well as we are focusing on academics. And the funny thing is, that's true for both kids with disabilities and without disabilities. And when you also think about it, schools are supposed to be spending as much time on creating opportunities for kids to use their character strengths, to use their resiliency, to use their sense of curiosity and well-being. And unfortunately, most schools don't have the opportunity to do that, as you know, because they're busy working towards the test. They're busy trying to cram a tight curriculum in, because unfortunately testing means a lot to the schools. It means that they're going to get their funding. It means they're going to be able to hire the appropriate faculty. It means they're going to be able to, hopefully down the line, have a broader curriculum. So where does the positive youth development come from if it's not going to come from schools? You're looking at it, right? So when we talk about well-being, what are we talking about? When we talk about troops being able to instill a sense of well-being in all of their girls, we say that well-being is defined as a combination of good functioning well and feeling good. Well-being in this context focuses on cultivating and giving girls a lifelong foundation of positive emotions as well as character strengths. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by character strengths. Character strengths, and I'm focusing mostly on them today, of hope and optimism, gratitude, self-regulation, appreciation for beauty, and perseverance. But if we go the other way, if we're just focusing on teaching well-being, is that enough? Is that rounding out our girls enough? And is it meeting the needs of all of our girls, especially when we have troops that have girls with varying physical, cognitive spectrum needs as well? So, there is a movement. Now, we say it's new, but ironically, it's been around for about 20 years. But of course, because I've been around for a heck of a lot longer than 20 years, to me, 20 years is pretty new. There is a movement out there called positive psychology. You probably heard it because there's a lot of workshops and things out there on it. The basic idea of positive psychology, and forgive me, I hate people who read PowerPoints, but this is one of those times where you're going to have to forgive me for it, because this is not my definition, but it is the definition of a colleague I respect quite a bit. Positive psychology is the scientific study of what makes life worthwhile. It's concerned with children and adults knowing their strengths, their coping skills, their learned talents and efficiencies, knowing their stressors and their challenges, and using all of them and building upon them in order to obtain personal, academic, professional life excellence. I forgot the word excellence. But it doesn't mean forgetting about your weaknesses and vulnerabilities. It means building a strong foundation up and creating a sense of self that is solid enough to be able to work on your weaknesses. In other words, using positive psychology. If you think about the traditional model of psychology, I was a psych major as an undergrad. All we spent our time doing was learning about deficiencies. We'll learn about depression. We'll learn about various levels of mental illness. We learn about basically the disease model of psychology. And the whole goal was to not only be able to learn about the ailments, but also what kind of behaviors would be needed to counteract them or fix them. Psychology, traditionally, is a disease model. Positive psychology builds on top of that. It says rather than working from the deficiencies perspective, rather than focusing on the weaknesses and the diseases, how about focusing on the strengths that people already have? How about building on top of what they've already got in order to work for the things that they don't have? Now, if our schools could do that, that would be terrific. But again, they don't necessarily have the time or the wherewithal or the resources to do it. But obviously, I'm not preaching anything new, because positive youth development and the idea of working with a girl's strengths and using them to encourage her to broaden her capabilities, that's a tenet from the Girl Scouts that goes back at least since, 1912, right? So we're not talking about anything new here. But the wrinkle that is new is because now that we have troops that also include girls with not only varying regular abilities, we are also talking about girls who might have challenges that relate to their physical needs or their cognitive needs or their behavioral needs. And yet they too have strengths that we need to learn how to tap into so that we can help take them to the next level. In addition to that, trying to figure out how to make sure that our troops are truly integrated, working together towards common goals, working together towards community service and giving back and financial management and science and all of the things that we are now trying to promote in all of our girls. How do we make these activities, these goals, and these projects effective for all of them? And the inroad might be tapping into some of the major tenets of positive psychology and thinking of those when you start to create the activities or start to recruit new kids for your troops. Christopher Peterson is a researcher, founding father, if you will, of the positive psychology movement. And he brought up something interesting. He said that in the United States, in our culture, people tend to think of children in general as very vulnerable, possibly weak, malleable, unable to defend themselves necessarily. I bet you would tell them they're wrong, right? Anecdotally, as you heard in my way too long bio, I apologize for that. I'm a mediator for the family court. And along with being a mediator for the family court, I mediate child welfare cases. Those are cases that involve DCP&P and child protection. And sometimes I hear people say, how the hell do you ever mediate that kind of issue? We don't mediate the abuse or the neglect. We leave that for a judge to decide. The issues that are mediatable, if you will, have to do with where does the child go? How do we make sure that the child gets effective education? If a family member is not able to take a child who's been removed from their parents, then how do we put them in a foster home that's going to be a good fit? If they do happen to be a child with a disability, who's going to go to the IEP meeting? Who's going to make sure that their curriculum is really effective and appropriate? We cover a lot of that. The funny thing is, what we never cover, and I admit in my own practice, we almost never cover, what are the strengths of this young person? Because the irony is, I also do cases where sometimes, sadly, kids have been in foster care for 10 years, 11 years. They're not supposed to be. There's lots of reasons why the law says they're not supposed to be growing up in foster care, but yet they are. And yet these young people are still resilient. They are still plugging away at school. They are still trying their best to make something for themselves. That is an example of positive psychology. So, Christopher Peterson says, as important as it is to minimize or eliminate problems among children and adolescents, it's just as important to help them thrive and form positive connections to the larger world, as well as the strengths and coping skills that live within themselves. Because the truth is, if you do not nurture those things, they will die out. It will be a lot harder. But we actually do have a lot of research out there that says by nurturing some of these character strengths, you also give the potential for not only academic success, but professional success going forward. But here's the piece that you may not know. If the goal is to incorporate programs and activities using positive psychology and promote well-being and efficiency and resilience, can it be for all girls? All girls. Girls who may have cognitive issues, girls who might have physical issues, girls who might have spectrum issues. The funny thing is, they've done a lot of research out there, and the major tenets of positive psychology are just as effective for girls with most of those disabilities as they are for lack of a horrible term, the normal girl. The strengths of all of the girls. That's a terrible phrase. I'm going to take that back. I apologize for that. So, though positive psychology addresses a lot of different aspects of strength development, I'm going to focus on character strengths. They have recently done a study that says if you try to break it down, on average, there are 24 different character strengths that are out there. They fall into a category of a handful of larger super strengths, if you will. Wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. Thank you. I wrote it and I can't even pronounce it. If you find in your projects that you can start looking for projects that tap into these strengths, it will be beneficial for all of your girls. All of your girls. All of your girls, regardless of age. It's a lot easier said than done, but you're already doing it in most of the programs that you create. You're obviously going to be looking at justice when you're creating most of your programs. You're looking at outreach to the community. You're looking at fairness and trying to make sure that the girls are involved in projects where people are treated fairly. You're looking at projects where maybe the girls are dealing with activism. You're looking at projects that might have to deal with getting out the vote and taking civic responsibility. So you're already doing a lot of these things in the projects you do. What you may not know is that they are beneficial for girls of varying ages and abilities. In addition to that, and by the way, I have a very long list of resources that I used for the creation of this presentation. I did not make it as a handout today. I apologize. It would have been a very lengthy handout anyway, because it also included some full articles and some video clips. I am going to make the resource list available if you'd like it. We'll send it out via email so that you don't have to waste all that paper. But it's worth noting that a lot of the websites and resources that I gave you talk about different activities that you can do with girls that will tap into these character strengths. Hello. So, There is an organization called Values in Action. Values in Action actually has come up with an assessment instrument, a test. That is, most of the tests are, the students fill it out themselves. It's their own response. The purpose of this assessment is to be able to learn what a child's behavioral strengths are, not just behavioral strengths, but their character strengths are. Because if we tap into usually the first 4 or 5 top strengths in order to teach them both academics and social skills, both will come up at about the same rate, and we found that kids retain the information that they learn for a lot longer. So in other words, the things they learn in 6th grade that build on top of the strengths that they already have often do carry them through to high school. And this, again, is true for girls of varying abilities. Anyway, they have this assessment tool that's called the classification of the VIA Youth Assessment Tool. VIA.org has a website where you can get a free copy of this assessment tool. And believe it or not, they have one for adults too. And you might want to take it. I have to say, I gave myself the thrill of going, hey, I wonder what I did. And the next thing I know, it's like an hour later and I'm taking this test. Because I want to know what character strengths I have too, and what I can build on too. But they have them for youth from ages 10 to 17. They say it's the most appropriate. But they have been able to use it for girls going down as low as about age 6. It is a self-assessment tool. In other words, if you take a look at it, what it asks is 100 questions that ask, how much is this situation like me or not like me? I always stand up for what I believe in. That's always like me, sometimes like me, never like me. It's, okay, you get the idea. Because it is a self-assessment test, there's always questions about how valid can a self-assessment instrument be. The truth is, they're finding that, again, when you take that self-assessment test and you find out those core strengths, and then you set up activities that tap into those core strengths, that academic achievement does go up, that social skills do go up, that comfort and sense of self-worth and security and resilience does go up. So, and that's true for adults as well as kids. So I strongly encourage you, if you can, get on the website, because after you take the survey, it gives you some ideas of how you can then apply it in your life. Since there is a survey for young people, you might want to ask a young person in your life. I'm sure a lot of you have some young person laying around that you can tap in, you can use. And from there, it gives the parents some ideas of how to tap into those character strengths. Oh, that is the website, viacharacter.org. Now here's the other thing. You can build the greatest programs. You can consider diversity. You can consider the needs of all of your girls. But again, positive psychology does not look from a pathology model. It's not looking at the diseases or what's wrong with the girls that are in your troop. It's looking at what are the strengths of the girls in your troop. But occasionally, you need the support of the families in order to make the activities you do successful and truly inclusive for all of your girls. I know that occasionally it is tough to get a buy-in from parents, to make sure that parents are actively engaged and also helping support you in your efforts. The irony is, though many of you grew up in classes that were considered inclusive classrooms, only a very small percentage of you, I'll bet, when you were in Girl Scouts, had a girl with a disability in your troop. Because community programs have not been inclusive that long. And there's a lot of reasons why they haven't been inclusive that long. If you need a sign language interpreter, you're not necessarily going to be able to get one for your troop, for every troop meeting. If you are in a school and it's an old building, you're not necessarily going to have doors that are wheelchair accessible or bathrooms that are appropriate. So there's lots of reasons why a lot of community programs have not been available to girls with disabilities until fairly recently. And of course, the political ideology too has come up of late. That still means, though, that you need to get a buy-in from parents. And if you have parents out there who believe in Girl Scouting enough that they want their daughters in there, then it behooves you to try to find out what it was in Scouting that they found worthwhile for their girls. What was the opportunity they wanted their girls to have? But a lot of times you get a pushback from families when you want to talk to them about their child, especially if it's a child with special needs. Why might you get a pushback? Well, one of the pushbacks you might get is that a lot of parents who have to go to IEP meetings, individualized educational placement meetings, walk in the door with their armor on, ready for the school to tell them what's wrong with their child and why they can't help their child, but this is the best we can do. And then those parents end up having to be not only advocates, but they have to be really focused on the strengths of their child to counteract all of the other things they're hearing from the local school board, the psychologists who have done their assessments, etc. In addition to that, when I worked for Legal Services for Children and I worked with parents who have kids with disabilities, and we did special education advocacy, and we taught them how to advocate for their young people. And then we also had teenagers who would advocate for themselves, so we gave them advocacy skills too. Unfortunately, the story that I got told a lot was when parents push back, quite often then the reply from the school is, well, maybe you should rethink how you're caring for your child. Maybe if you considered medication, things would be a little bit easier. And suddenly it became an attack of the parents too, and their parenting. So here you come along, misinformed Girl Scout leader, volunteer who really wants to make her program inclusive, who really wants to get the parents actively involved, and you pick up the phone and you call the parent and say, can you and I have a meeting so that we can talk about the needs of your child, so that we can make our program really a good fit for your girl? And then suddenly you get a huge pushback. And the reason you get that pushback is because they're afraid it's going to be the repeat of what went on in their school and their child's special ed meeting. So therefore, if you are adopting the principles of positive psychology, your approach has to be from a strengths-based perspective. You need to reach out to the parents from a strengths-based perspective. I know you can't read these, but this will be in the handout. But some of the questions you might want to ask that will help you do your job better, but also get a buy-in from the parents. Again, these are all going to be questions that relate to the strengths of their daughter. So if you do get a parent in who really is willing to work with you to make their scouting experience as inclusive and positive as it can be, some of the questions you may want to ask, first of all, you need to pick a time and a location that's going to be comfortable for the parent if you have it available to you. Don't just pick up a phone and assume they're going to be available. I work with divorcing parents all the time. They always assume if I pick up the phone, you're going to be there, right? And it's never the case. So pick a location that's appropriate. When you're there, please, if the girl has already been in your troop, let her know how glad that you are that she is in your troop. If she's about to be in your troop, tell the mom or the dad that you really want them here because you want to make sure that this can be the most positive experience for all of the girls as possible. And by the way, you can have these same meetings with all of the parents if you have that available to you. These are not exclusively disability issue questions. So setting the tone for the conversation with a parent is crucial. One of the questions you might want to ask is, what does your child do that makes you smile? A lot of parents enjoy answering that question because it's the first question that's setting the tone about what does my child do that affects me in a positive way? What is it I wish the rest of the world could see in terms of the strengths of my daughter that somehow I seem to be the only one who really gets to see it? Then it also gives you some information about maybe some of the activities that this child might like to do, or the thing like maybe this girl likes to tell jokes, maybe this girl likes to, I don't know, depending on her abilities, maybe she's got some dance steps that are really special and she likes to dance when you put on some music, maybe whatever. It gives you an idea of some of the activities that the girl might be interested in doing. Then you want to ask a question about what are some of the activities your daughter does for herself that makes her smile? What does she like to do that in turn makes her smile? Again, that gives you a rough idea of what her strengths are, those strengths that she already has that you can build on top of, that she will enjoy building on top of. Then the question of what is it that makes your child angry or sad? And the reason for that is because depending on what the disability is, there may be some activities that are triggering for girls. And you need to know what they are. And then you might even need to know a little bit more about that. If you've got a girl with some behavioral challenges, maybe even extreme behavioral challenges, there's usually something that leads up to a particular behavioral incident. And you need to know what those triggers are. So sometimes the best way to ask that question to a parent is, what does it look like when your child's sad? What does it look like before your child gets sad or angry? What should I look out for, especially if you're a volunteer and you're not necessarily leading the meeting per se, but you're there checking out how the rest of the girls are responding? What should I look out for to see to take the temperature, if you will, of where your daughter is at on any given day? How do you know when your daughter starts to feel, and because usually a parent will start to tell you emotions, things that make the child sad, how the child reacts. Is it something that's going to make a child sad? Is it something that's going to make a child angry? Is it going to frustrate the child, etc.? And then from there, I'm not the mom, I'm not the dad, I don't know your child as well as you do, but give me some ideas of what I should know or what I should be looking out for. And then if your daughter does get angry, frustrated, upset, or has some kind of extreme reaction, what should I do? What would you like me to do? But then you can also go in the other direction. How do I know when your daughter is happy? How do I know when your daughter feels good about what she does? What's it going to look like? What should I look out for? What can I build on top of to make sure that she has more of those experiences? So getting a buy-in from the family matters. But here's the other thing you need to think about. And this is an article that I actually got off, this is from an article that's from a Girl Scouting website, where, and again, we're not going to read this whole thing. We teach girls, all girls, that they're supposed to accept everybody and that everybody is capable, etc. But we often use a word like tolerance. You should tolerate everybody. Everybody and every ability should be tolerated. And here's the drawback on phrases like tolerated. Not every kid is going to be able to bounce back with the behaviors of another kid or the abilities of another kid. And when you use a phrase like tolerance, think about the things you tolerate. You tolerate the pain after you've had a needle. You tolerate a stressful day. You tolerate it when you have to go swimming at camp and the water is super cold. You tolerate. You don't tolerate people. You don't learn about people when you use tolerance. And so if you find yourself in a situation where the other girls are having a rough time incorporating a girl with a difference into the troop, what are some of your options? You can have conversations with the whole troop about differences without making it about a particular ability. You can talk about diversity. You can talk about stereotypes and why stereotypes exist. You need to check out your own perceptions about beliefs and abilities, any concerns you might have about having certain girls in your troop, having every girl in your troop, having the pressure of being a leader or a volunteer. You might want to even consider inviting people from various communities into your meetings. And that can mean lots of communities. It can mean different cultural communities, nationality communities, members of the deaf community, etc. Talk to your fellow leaders and members of your local council to see if they have any ideas of what to do to help all of your girls feel welcome and included. There's even an activity I found that I thought was kind of cool that said if a girl feels really good about herself or willing to talk about herself, she can, when on her first day of the meeting, if she feels comfortable doing it, she can give herself a Yelp promotion about what is it she likes to do, what is it she feels good about, what is it she enjoys doing, and if you like that, you might also like, and she becomes a walking Yelp advertisement. And it also opens it up for you to then facilitate the conversation with how many other girls in the room are into that activity or into that event. Remember, I heard what the professor said earlier. There's always bands, there's always games, there's always something that girls like, and then it's suddenly something that they can now bond with. Give the girls in your troop, when you can, the opportunity, all girls, to have a leadership role, if possible. Because girls learning from each other sometimes mitigates the fear of the differences. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need the girls to be each other's buddies all the time. You could have a girl with a disability lead an activity. And that gives them not only a sense of character strength and community and responsibility, it also puts them in a different, it changes the perspective of a lot of the girls around them. And if you really find that you're having a situation where a girl is not being accepted or welcomed into the group, then of course, you got to talk with the family. And see if the family has any suggestions for what can work. As I said, there's lots of different websites out there that talk about activities that you can do to incorporate girls in the group. But some of these conversations that I said then end up sparking other activities that you can build on top of, community events, etc. The point is, inclusion is not just about being inclusive. It's not just about having a girl in your troop. It's about building on the strengths of all of the girls, making sure that all of the girls have a sense of self in every activity that they do. And if you can build on top of those 24 behavioral characteristics as the foundation of the activities that you create, you will also be giving them an opportunity for both social and academic excellence. So, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it.